Right on the money.
Okay, so we'll start. Welcome everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming out on this. What here in DC has been very cold here. Um, I hope everyone's staying warm in this time. But we are a week away from our National Legislative Conference that is happening next Tuesday here in Washington, D.C. If you haven't got your ticket, if you want to come through, please come through. It's going to be a great lineup. Uh, but I wanted to just introduce President Palomares. We have, just to give you an overview of what we have in store, like we were trying to do these virtual sessions more frequently, at least once a month, to try to get folks more tuned in to different issues that we don't really quite um, dig into deeper in. And so there's a lot going on in DC. There's a lot happening around the country. And I think sometimes it's important for all of us to kind of just stay afloat and abreast. The other thing we also have is like a very rich history. Today we turn 97 years old. And so this is a very important milestone for LULAC's history, but also an important time for us to kind of look back on our history to see what we can kind of take from the past and then bring it forward. What have we learned? What can be used? Very few organizations have as rich a history and how an amazing history that we do. So I think we're very lucky today to have Dr. Orozco to share to some insight on things. So I'll turn it over to President Palomares, and again, we will please tune in. We'll try to have one of these at least once a month and try to talk about different issues. Dr. Orozco back and talk about even more aspects of history and aspects of LULAC's kind of great experience on tackling certain topics. So I think so I'm definitely looking forward to tonight's event. We have a lot of fellows coming through our office quite often. So quite every time I always do the orientation with them. So I go through LULAC's history with them, and they're always in awe and they're always inspired by the great history that we have as an organization. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to
Okay.
President.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who have not had a history lesson yet, we do read books about LULAC, and we have a lot of material on our website. So if you get a chance, a lot of material there. The other thing that we wanted to do tonight is start some history lessons. Okay. I heard Dr. Cynthia Orozco a few weeks ago when she was doing one locally in Warden, Texas. She was talking about that area. And we have decided what we want to do is start a series of historical sessions on LULAC. So this is one of the first ones. And one of the things that she'll be doing very soon is she's working with the Women's Commission to do something in March during Women's Month, to do something on women in LULAC. I understand, and she can talk about this, but I think she's finished a book on women in LULAC. And so I'll let her talk about that. But a couple of other things real quickly. Ray was talking about these sessions. So we want to do some historical stuff. And then, of course, Ray started some sessions last year on policy issues, and we hope to continue those. We may do one or two a month. The other thing is training. So besides historical sessions, besides policy stuff on just different issues that Ray will be dealing with, we also want to talk a little bit about some education issues. One of them that we want to do is, and you've probably seen some emails from me and some, as we renew the councils, making sure that we're in compliance, with the IRS. And so we're doing a few sessions out there in regards to getting your EIN squared away and your IRS 990, and any requirements we have like that. So we're going to continue doing some training in that area. And one of the sessions we hope to do in about a month or so is making sure that you file your 990 postcard. How do you do that? So we're working on some training sessions besides the historical stuff, policy stuff. You'll be getting some educational sessions. So I just kind of want to mention that. Cynthia today, she's our national historian. She'll be talking about, history and LULAC, but today we celebrate our 97th birthday. I'll be doing an interview pretty soon in about 20 minutes with Corpus Christi TV. They called me a few minutes ago and they want to do an interview for their 10 o'clock news. So I'll be signing off for a few minutes, but I'll be back to hear the rest of the presentation. But with that, I want to introduce Dr. Cynthia Orozco. She is our national historian. And I'm going to read just a couple of things that I have here. She's a professor emeritus in history and humanities in Eastern New Mexico University in Rio Doso, New Mexico. Okay. She's also she's with the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies scholar, and that was in 2023. She is also involved with National LULAC Education Raymond Theus Award. She got that in 2023 for some of the work that she's done. She's also the University of New Mexico Rio Doso President Award for Teaching and Service. She's got a history of awards that she's received the last few years. She's Alliance for Texas History. She's a board member of the Alliance for Texas History. She's New Mexico Humanities Council past board member. She's done some postdoctoral fellow work with the Ford Foundation. She is also with DeWitt County Historical Commission. She did some of the presentations a couple of weeks ago of those counties in that area. She was with the Texas State Historical Association. She's been a fellow there. LULAC New Mexico Educator of the Year. And like I said, she's got several books that we hope to have at our national convention in June in Fort Worth. We want to set up an exhibit there for her so she can show off all the books that she has written. So with that, I want to turn it over to her, talk a little bit about the history, and then, we'll be open to some questions at the end. Ray's going to help us kind of, work the microphones and all that if you have some questions for her. So we'll take those and I'll be around. I'm going to go do an interview for Corpus Christi and then I'll be back in a few minutes. So with that, Cynthia, the show is yours. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, folks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so proud to be here because we are celebrating the 97th anniversary of the founding of LULAC. And so today I want to talk about who founded LULAC, why was it founded, and how did it come about? So with that, I have a PowerPoint and we're going to begin to share. All right, so please bear with me. This is always a little challenge for me, technologically speaking, but everybody can see that, correct? So today, again, we're talking about LULAC's founding, why, who, and how. This is a photo that most people recognize. It is probably the most common photo that folks see when they think about the history of LULAC. Often people believe that this is a photo of the founding date on February 17th, but we actually have no photo of that event. Luckily, there was a professor named Oliver Douglas Weeks from the University of Texas at Austin, who was in contact with Carlos Castañeda, who was probably a doctoral student at the time. And he's the person who connected Weeks to this. Dr. Weeks was a political scientist. And because of him, we have an academic article about the founding. And so we actually have a whole lot of information about everything that happened in the 1920s. Here we can see it's about 101 men, and I will later talk about why there are no women here. But these are folks primarily from San Antonio, Corpus Christi, Alice, the Rio Grande Valley. And it should also be noted that there were about 150 people at that conference, at that convention. But mostly we just see the men in this particular photo. So the question is, why was LULAC founded? And that's really one of the first things that we need to talk about. First of all, of course, everyone knows that, of course, we had Native Americans who were the original folks in this, in the Americas. And of course, we know that the Spanish also came into Texas in the 1530s. And then we also know, of course, we went on to have Spanish colonization. We also went through the entrance of Euro-Americans in the 1820s. the Texas Revolution, and of course, finally, the U.S.-Mexico War of 1846 to 1848. After the U.S.-Mexico War, we did become a colonized people within the United States. And so it is at that time that all kinds of structures, policies, patterns are established to subordinate the Mexican people. Now, moving into the 20th century, we know the Mexican Revolution of 1910, 1911 was very important because it re-Mexicanized especially the Southwest and even moving into the Midwest and other areas. So we had a very large Mexican immigrant population that came in. Also in the 1910s, we had a very bad era that we now refer to as the Matanza, where there was estimates are anywhere from several hundred to several thousand Mexicans and Mexican Americans that were killed by the Texas Rangers and law enforcement personnel that was dedicated to racial violence in South Texas, particularly the Valley, and also in West Texas, in places like Port Benito. We also know World War I also was a major factor leading to the founding of LULAC, because we did have both Mexicans and Mexican Americans who volunteered or were drafted into the war. And when they came back, many of them could not get a cup of coffee in a restaurant. So that was part of the reason for the mobilization. Another major factor is what we call the Americanization movement, not to be confused with ordinary assimilation patterns that we have in the United States of most migrant populations. The Americanization movement was a super patriotic effort to promote U.S. patriotism, and that did impact the founding and cause the founding of the LULAC organization. Now, we could also talk about the various conditions that our community experienced. Political subordination is perhaps the most important. And again, if we look at the year 1920, 1919 to 1920, we have one Tejano named Jose Tomas Canales, known as J.T. Canales, in the state legislature. In 1921, we have 0 Mexican Americans, Latinos that are in the Texas legislature. So we don't have political representation. And despite a few counties in South Texas, Laredo, maybe Webb County, we don't have significant representation in governmental offices. Moreover, we have the poll tax. The poll tax had started particularly in southern states around 1902 or so, and it is in effect that you have to pay in order to vote up until the civil rights legislation of the mid-1960s. In addition, after the U.S.-Mexico War, those folks who had lands typically have lost most of their lands by 1900. We are predominantly a working class community, but of course we also have small business people. Nonetheless, we have severe discrimination in employment. There's some jobs that Mexicans, Mexican Americans are simply not hired. Also, we have no minimum wage until the 1930s. And the farm workers especially are highly exploited. And again, about half of our community would have been farm workers in farm labor around 1930. We also have in the 1920s the rise of the KKK, spouting white supremacy. And we also have expanded patterns of segregation. The segregation begins in the schools, begins to occur in the 1890s, but it is enhanced in the 1910s and 1920s. And perhaps the worst of the segregation was the separate schools. So we had, in Texas, we had Black schools, we had white schools, we had schools for so-called Mexicans. I mentioned also the patterns of racial violence. Lynching did occur against the Latino, Latinx community. And again, we were not in positions of authority in law enforcement for the most part, so we would see extreme racial violence. As mentioned, The patterns of segregation were quite overt. There would have been signs, and these kinds of signs I've actually found out from other works were also seen in the South. They were seen in the Southwest, and I'm sure the Midwest as well. This is one published printed out of Dallas in 1942. And then this one out of San Antonio in the mid-30s. We serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans. The reference to the Spanish being a reference to the Canary Islanders of San Antonio who considered themselves Spanish and not necessarily Mexicans. They too were included in exclusion. So one of the things that we should think about is which organizations worked to confront these problems. And really the most important organizations are listed here. Now, even before these organizations, and at the same time, we had what we call mutualistas, mutual aid societies that were common in almost every community where you had a community of Mexican descent people. Nonetheless, we do know that in the 1910s, especially after some gruesome lynchings, that we have the first major civil rights organization, the Primer Congreso Mexicanista, which is really a conference that occurs in 1911. It's a transnational event. There's people from Mexico, but also people from all over the Texas. And really today, I'm only talking about Texas because this is where LULAC was founded. But again, thinking and remembering that LULAC from the very beginning planned to become a national organization, and it is definitely national and of course even inclusive of Puerto Rico and other places as well. But if we look at the organizations that existed, we see the Primer Congreso Mexicanista and Laredo, but they were handicapped by transportation and lack of a telephone this early. Another group, Agrupación Protectora Mexicana, which responded again to the lynchings and the racial violence of the time. But again, remember, these folks, especially from the Agrupación, are primarily working class people. It is very difficult to organize, and there is very, very little money to do so. So after World War I, we see really the beginnings of what becomes a movement to create LULAC. So we first have the Order Sons of America in 1921 in San Antonio, followed by a splinter group of some of the same people that now join a new organization called the Order Knights of America in 1927. And then we have the Latin American Citizens League, which is founded only in the Valley in 1927. Now, the Order Sons of America was founded around 1920, 1921. And again, you can see that this is a listing of different places that it appeared: San Antonio, Pearsall, Somerset, Corpus Christi, Alice, Kingsville, Beeville, and Uvalde. So you can see it was never meant as a local operation. And even the Constitution made reference to becoming a national organization. So they realized that the problems that we had were nationwide. Now, we have very few photos of some of these organizations. We do have a picture of the Order Sons of America in Corpus Christi. And right here in the very front on the at the right, that is Ben Garza. He's one of the primary leaders of that organization. We also have in San Antonio, we do have a photo of the Order Knights of America. This is a Christmas party that they had for poor Mexican children in Casiano Park around 1927. And again, that's one of the few photos that we have of the Order Knights of America. Here we have an emblem from a newsletter that they did have. So we do have a couple of surviving newsletters of the Order Knights of America. And there you can see the shield. And if you think about the shield, that is the symbol of protection. And that is why LULAC has the emblem of the shield. It actually comes, whether consciously or unconsciously, it comes first from the Order Knights of America. The Knights, again, being people who are going to be soldiers against racism. As mentioned, we also have the League of Latin American Citizens, and as of yet, we don't have any photographs of the League in the Valley. So then another question we have is, who were the major founders of LULAC? And I do want to say that really, when we talk about the founding of LULAC, I do consider it part of what I refer to as the Mexican American Civil Rights Movement. Because it is an effort, it is a movement, it is not just elite men, or it's not even just brave leaders. Instead, it's a movement. Nonetheless, I like to focus on 11 people, 11 men who were the principal founders, the movers and the shakers. They were all men, they were all born in the United States. They were all, at the time, it was common for people in the 1910s and 20s to refer to themselves as Mexico Tejanos. Their occupations were varied. A couple of them were lawyers, businessmen, professionals, and skilled workers. Some of them, the attorneys especially, were college educated. Others probably had like a junior high school level. Now, in the book that I wrote called No Mexicans, Women, or Dogs Allowed, I do include Santiago Tafoya of San Antonio as one of the founders. But now my new thinking is that I want to exclude him from that list because he was president of the Order Sons, but he was an obstructionist. He was egocentric and wanted to continue to be the leader. And he was with the Order Sons, but he refused to join what became LULAC. So I am now excluding him from the list. Some of you may recognize the name Tafoya. He is related to the now prominent Dr. Carmen Tafoya of San Antonio, an educator and writer. Getting back to the founders, one of the first persons that I include is John Solis. John Solis was a high school dropout, but later went on to college and became an aide for Congressman Chick Kazin much decades later. So he was a furniture store employee, and he's the person from the early 1920s that the original founding continues with the LULAC organization. So he doesn't become a national president, but he is consistent and dedicated. He's a very, very important person in this effort. The second person from San Antonio was MC Gonzalez, Manuel C. Gonzalez, who was an attorney. I believe he's about the second or third Tejano attorney in the entire state of Texas. Later, he becomes a consulado for Guatemala, and he is one of the early past presidents as well. The next person we have is Mauro Machado, who was a clerk for something called the Clegg Company, a man who wrote lots and lots of letters, and he's the person who added the word united to the name of the LULAC organization. He also became a national president in the early 30s. The next person is Alonso Esperales, who I consider the principal founder of LULAC. Again, let me say he is the principal founder of LULAC, not Ben Garza, who became the first president. Alonso Perales was the key founder of the Latin American Citizens League in the Valley. He is the person who is pushing for unification of all these organizations. He was born in Alice, but after he completed his degree, he was an orphan and poor, but very ambitious, worked in Washington, D.C., and then ended up in San Antonio after 1930. Another person is J. Lou Sines, who was a dedicated activist. He was a teacher all of his life. He was from the Rio Grande Valley. He would typically be fired anywhere he went because he would complain about segregation and inferior conditions of the schools. Also, he was a World War I vet and wrote a Spanish language diary that has now been translated by Dr. Emilio Zamora, his experience in World War I. Here we have J.T. Canales. The Canales were land grant recipients, so they were a wealthy family that were able to maintain their land, had cattle, and they were in the oil industry later. He was a millionaire, and he was a state legislator between 1900 and 1920 from Brownsville. And he also became a president of LULAC, and Canales is the major author of the LULAC Constitution. Here is Eduardo Idad. There are a couple of Idads that were involved in the 1911 Congreso Mexicanista Conference. Eduardo Idad had a number of newspapers. He was from Laredo, and we believe he wrote most of the LULAC code. Clemente Idad was his brother. He was with the American Federation of Labor. He was the first Mexican descent person to be officially paid by the AFL. And he was a great orator, and unfortunately, he died in the early mid-1930s. So we lost Idad very early on. Andres de Luna was a panadero from Corpus Christi. He kept excellent records. He was appointed or elected as a historian of LULAC in the 1930s. Because of him, we have numerous documents that we would have lost otherwise. And here's a picture of Ben Garza. He was a restaurateur originally from Rockport and then settled in Corpus Christi, president of the Order Sons, and also the very first president of LULAC. The other person that I'm now adding, because as I mentioned, I took off Santiago Tafoya, and I've added Eulalio Marin, who was the publisher of El Paladín, which means the night. He was also an AFL organizer. His newspaper called for unity of those various organizations. He was both connected to Robstown and Corpus Christi. El Paladín actually became an official organ of LULAC. It existed throughout the 1930s. Also, I want to mention, I don't consider these founders, but Castañeda, Carlos Castañeda was from Brownsville. He got both his BA, MA, and doctorate at UT Austin, and he's the person, again, responsible for the presence of Oliver Douglas Weeks, Dr. Weeks, at the conference. And because of Weeks, we have so much documentation of that early founding. I should also mention that Castañeda went on to become a major LULAC activist, and he is the first Latino to get a doctorate in the state of Texas around 1932. Dr. Oliver Douglas Weeks, as I mentioned, I have not located a photo of him, but again, he wrote much of the early history that we know about the organization. All right, so that is the first part of my presentation. Now let's move on to the second part. And let's see. Let's see, hold on. Okay, the second part, here we go. We had to break this up. It was a big PowerPoint. So many people have asked, well, why weren't there any women in LULAC? And I usually answer that by saying in 1929, there were no women who were permitted to participate in that convention. It was tradition at that point for women not necessarily to participate in these kinds of organizations. We will say that there was a long history of women in mutual aid societies and even of leadership of women in the organizations, but patriarchy was still strong. Also, we really did not have what I would call an independent women's middle class. Most of the women who were middle class at this time developed their class status from men in the family for the most part. Of course, there's a few widows and other women who are independent and separate. Okay, so I do have a picture here of Adelaida Garza, and if you look at my Young Mexicans book, I have a chapter on to what extent women were involved in organizations that were connected to LULAC, or in what capacity they organized. So we do know that people like Adelaida Garza, they did have a separate organization called the Alpha Club. We also know that women worked independently in helping the cause. And I say that not just so-called helping men, but helping the cause as well. Here we have a picture of Carolina and Luis Wilmot. She is a homemaker and he's a jeweler, and he also was a major activist in Corpus Christi. And he was active into probably the 1980s or so. I did see him. I've been in LULAC circles a long time. I did see him at the 1979 National Convention. Adela Sloss is a woman from San Juan, and I have written a book about her. She did not join LULAC, but she was a major co-activist with LULAC. She corresponded with Perales. She corresponded with J.T. Canales, J. Lou Saenz, and she wrote the first biography book of Alonso Perales, and she wrote articles praising the LULAC organization and women in LULAC. Nonetheless, we see that by 1931, if you look at this picture of Alice, Texas LULAC convention, this is the so-called national convention. And we call it national because LULAC did become a national organization. It was planned to be that from the very beginning. In order to keep things straight, we refer to the very first one as the first national convention and so on. But again, you can see that women are present here. And we also know by 1933, well, before, even from 1929, for a few years, there are women participating in auxiliaries. Some of the auxiliaries have dedicated leadership with elections, and other auxiliaries are simply more supportive, supplemental. But nonetheless, they are contributing to the same cause. So another question we have is, well, how did LULAC organize? So if we look at how LULAC organized, we can see that they focused on citizenship, they focused on equal rights, they focused on use of the English language because they were a Spanish-speaking people who could already speak Spanish, had good command of Spanish. In 1929, there was hardly any so-called loss of the Spanish language. They focused on getting rid of racial prejudice, using the vote, opposing any kind of radical demonstrations, and they call for equal representation on juries and in governmental affairs. So then another question we have is, how is it that LULAC continues? How is it that LULAC continues to exist after 97 years? Because if you think about it, it's probably the longest lasting major organization that continues to be alive today. So first of all, I would say, number one, it had a solid constitution. And again, we attribute that to the genius of J.T. Canales. Secondly, it is rooted in democratic principles. In other words, everybody should, not everybody, but people should be able to participate in a democratic fashion. Thirdly, it had very specific aims and purposes. Number four, we would say it had a moderate stance. It was not necessarily conservative, nor was it radical. It also had a rotating leadership. Every year, the leadership would change at the national level, state level, later district, and even local, it would change. Annual convention, so meeting times, meeting places where people would get re-energized. Seventhly, I would say the geographic dispersion. In other words, LULAC was not just going to be in San Antonio. It was not just going to be in Texas, but it expanded to New Mexico, Arizona, California, Colorado. and then in the 50s into the Midwest, and then in the 70s into the Northeast. It goes on to expand into Florida, picks up the Cubans, picks up the Puerto Ricanos, and today very much pan-Latino organization, including Puerto Rico. Communication is another one. From the very beginning, they had El Paladín newspaper, something else called LULAC Notes, which I have yet to find anywhere. LULAC News, which became an important means of communication since 1931. Number 9, they had an expansionist vision, and they would organize, especially out of San Antonio and Houston, a flying squadron of mostly men who would go on the weekends to try to organize other communities. Number 10, a shared financial responsibility, meaning that primarily LULAC News would move from one place to the next so that different councils would pick up the responsibility of selling ads and printing the news, which was a news magazine, not a newsletter. And finally, I would say also its inclusiveness over time, with emphasis on over time, because over time it came to include women in 1933, youth after 1937, 38, when Junior LULAC was included. In the 1940s, it specifically attempts to include non-Latinos, especially white people. In the 1950s, we see the first chapters of college students. In the 1980s, non-US citizens are permitted. And then in the 2000s, we see the rise of LGBTQ councils. As I mentioned, LULAC News has been very, very important. And here's a picture of what the second issue of LULAC News looked like. You can see it's coming out of San Antonio, but they're already talking about a convention in Kingsville. And at the bottom, they're talking about moving into West Texas, which it did readily. By 1940, there are 100 LULAC chapters, and the chapters do come and go. People lose their jobs. People are intimidated. People get exhausted because they can never get rid of racism. But nonetheless, LULAC sometimes is a moment, but it is an important moment. It is a movement. Here's a few of the places that have provided photographs for this presentation. And here's a picture of some of the books that I've written. The No Mexicans really is about the origins of LULAC. Agent of Change is about Adela Sloss Bento and her civil rights activism from 1927 to 1990. And then a book on Alonso Perales, the founder of LULAC. I also want to thank David Contreras. He is the past LULAC national historian. He put many, many LULAC news on the internet, on the website of LULAC. So we have that. In addition, I should mention that I have developed a LULAC timeline. The first one I did was in 1990, which was only for Texas. I did it for a Texas convention. And then 2024, I did a national revision that is much more thorough. So folks can look for that on the website. Here's some contact information for me. And I want to remind everybody to think about preparing for the 2029 centennial, to collect records and donate them to an archive, to make a list of your council accomplishments, make a council timeline, make a list of your past leadership, and create anything that you can to spread the LULAC, the history of the LULAC organization. So with that, I'll take any comments or questions that folks might have.
So we have a here from Miss Stella Fair.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't
can
mean to
you
cut
hear me, Stella?
I was just when during the presentation when she discussed the part about inclusiveness
Yes.
and the efforts to include non-Latinos in the organization, I was kind of
Yes.
surprised that I didn't hear hear any mention of other groups like African Americans because it looks like our experiences were so similar. I would have thought that
Yes.
there would have been efforts to unite with uh, us, to fight discrimination.
Oh, that's an excellent question, and it's one that deserves a whole lot of more attention. What I can say is that we definitely know that the majority of Latinos, Latinx people would have been, and many still are, racist against African Americans. Let's say that point blank to begin with. But at the same time, I will also say that there were past presidents, perhaps the most well-known person who very blatantly said he had no interest in working with Black folks is Felix Tejeda from Houston, who also did not permit Blacks into his restaurant. But there were also people like John J. Herrera from Houston who did work with the NAACP. There are examples of people like him in LULAC that have crossed those barriers. And I would say, definitely under administrations, like the Ruben Bonilla administration, the Hector Flores administration, there's been coalition work. That's hard research. That's a big focus that needs to be done. And down the line, maybe I can give that more attention.
Okay, I really do appreciate your honesty there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mancera, let me bring you up. So Mr. Mancera,
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Orozco, for a wonderful presentation. It is difficult to summarize so much history in such a short time, so thank you for being as concise as possible. But I do want to share the people that are listening that over the years, having traveled, when you have the passion of so many consuls and district directors, state directors, that they at one point are become very authoritarian, and their leadership is just overflowing. It's just they're passionate. But one of the things I've noticed that always keeps us intact is the Constitution. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the Constitution that was key to make sure that it keeps us in line, and go back to the Constitution. And somebody will always do a point of order, and it kind of dies down. So I have always shared with LULAC, especially the new leadership, is that the Constitution has been such a backbone of LULAC to ensure that we continue with the mission. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, the Constitution has changed over time. And again, it's a flexible Constitution that allows for amendments, much like our U.S. Constitution. It's saw major revision as early as 1939, 1940, and it continues to be revised. And some people would say it needs to be revised again today.
we have Mr. Paul. Let's see. Mr. Paul, can you unmute yourself? There you
go. This is Paul de la Peña, El Paso. I was just wondering if you could give us any insight into when Junior LULAC started and how many chapters there are around the country.
Okay. Right now, I have no idea how many there are. But let me say that Junior LULAC started around 1937, 38. There are two women whose names we have, Mrs. Charles Ramirez, I don't have her first name, and another woman named Mrs. Santos Herrera. They create LULAC Youth. At the time, it's pre-teens, because it's more kind of from a maternalistic idea of taking care of children. In the 1950s, Dr. George Garza, originally from San Marcos, and then he moves to Laredo, he makes Junior LULAC more like for teenagers, and it is continued to be that. Junior LULAC really sees its heydays in the 50s and 60s. And I read somewhere at one point, probably its peak, there are 2,000 Junior LULAC members. So it is major. And again, like I said, LULAC goes up and down in different places depending on the moment, the need, and for lots of different reasons. It activates, deactivates, but again, it continues to persist. And I should say that some of those junior LULACers do become national leaders over time. So Junior LULAC has served a very important function. As I mentioned also, we also saw college LULAC chapters. The first one starting in San Marcos. I believe it's San Marcos and then Austin in the 1950s. Mario Bledo, who went on to become a national president, was in a college chapter of LULAC at UT Austin.
Awesome.
We can take a few more questions if anybody else has any questions. I have Miss Leal. Here we go.
Dr. Orozco, Gloria Leal from Austin, Texas.
Yes, hi.
I just wanted to thank you for your presentation, and I just inform you, although you probably already know, that MABA Texas, Mexican Bar Association of Texas, has had several seminars, gatherings where we discuss the foundings of LULAC and how lawyers were instrumental in the beginning. Not completely, but for example, we give credit
Yes.
to Mr. Canales and other lawyers that were involved, not only in the writing of the Constitution, but in some litigation with LULAC's support that advanced our efforts. So I wanted to talk to you about that, and maybe at some future time, maybe add our information to yours so you could know that we are following this issue. I also wanted to comment on Vice President Ray Mancero's comment and yours about so some groups are so ingrained that they forget that there's a new leadership coming behind them. And I'm glad you mentioned the obstructionists, because I think sometimes we still have that in the organization. But I think we are moving forward. And for example, I'm the first woman general counsel in LULAC's 94th, 95th history, right? So we're making some progress, but I wanted to bring to your attention that MABA Texas appreciates all the work that you do, and we look forward to cooperating with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And as mentioned, really, of course, we have the founding of Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund around 1968 or so. Well, Pete Tejerina is the national president of LULAC. He is one of the founders. And of course, Mario Bledo's involved with that. But really, before MALDEF, LULAC is MALDEF. Okay, we look at the Del Rio versus Salvatierra case in around 1931, which is challenging segregation. That really is a LULAC effort. They have LULAC in Del Rio. So that's one of the first one. Of course, the Bastrop, Delgado versus Bastrop. That's mostly Gus Garcia, who is legal counsel off and on for the LULAC organization. And then, of course, in 1954, we have the Hernandez versus Texas case, which challenges ultimately the idea that Mexican Americans have the legal right to serve as jurors and really are a class apart. Again, that's LULAC funded. Immediately, $900 from San Antonio LULAC went to that case. The American GI Forum was also important in funding that. Even the American GI Forum comes out in 1948 or so because Dr. Hector Garcia is a member of LULAC Veterans Committee in Corpus Christi, and it is LULAC that has established that network that allows the GI Forum to come into fruition as a veterans organization after 1948.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
I'm going to actually ask one question myself. Um, One of the issues that we see a lot in the current space is like obviously the issue of immigration, and I get constantly asked questions like citizens is in your title of the organization. How does that? At what point does LULAC kind of move from like a Tejano Mexican American kind of organization to all Latino, irrespective of immigration status?
Okay. Well, I think you're really asking two questions. Let me first say, with regards to the question of citizenship, um, when those organizations that I talked about, they came together in 1927 in Harlingen to talk about the question of should Mexican citizens, Mexican nationals, be allowed into what they were going to create. And the response by the then Tejanos was to know we need to utilize the idea of U.S. citizenship as a tool, as an argument to argue for our rights in the United States. And while modern day thinking people may think, oh, LULAC was anti-immigrant, I would say that had LULAC included those folks, those are the folks that would have been deported, okay, and the organization would have likely have fallen apart. And many of the Mexican nationals that were here were divided, of course, by class, but also by political positions with regards to the Mexican Revolution and the question of homeland. Where is the homeland? Is it here or is it Mexico? So that is why it was for US citizens from the very beginning. Nonetheless, our community changed a lot. And so definitely we've had major waves of Mexican nationals that have come in. And by the 1980s, it was very clear that they are an important part of our community. And so there was a dedicated effort to make sure that people understood that they too could become members of the organization. As you mentioned, LULAC is really a pan-Latino, pan-Latinx organization. Again, really from the very beginning, there was no signs that said, oh, well, we don't want Puerto Ricans, or we don't want Cubans, or we don't want people from El Salvador. Basically from the very beginning, it was meant to be a Latinx Latino organization because they are part of our community. But again, basically because of the geographic location of different ethnic groups or ethnic peoples over time, national communities, the Puerto Ricans were primarily in the Northeast at the time, although, you also had some in places like Iowa and Ohio. Florida was historically the place where the Cubans were, and they came in. California, we see so many Latinos that moved into California from all parts of Latin America. So they have been part of it. Washington, D.C. has always been a pan-Latino kind of place, and those places have always had mixed pan-Latino membership. So it is a pan-Latino Latinx organization. And again, anybody can join. Anybody of any ethnicity can join.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple questions here in the chat. I have somebody mentioned, we talked earlier about junior LULAC councils, and I think I'm going to go to the next one. As someone who has studied LULAC's history extensively, what part of its legacy resonates with you personally, and why?
Oh, that's probably the hardest question I've ever had. Well, I guess probably the life story of Alonso Perales is one that I wish more people would pay attention to. Again, I am the author of a major book on Alonso Perales because the fellow was an orphan without parents who had died. He was living under a porch. And he went on to become a U.S. diplomat and a lawyer. He was in 13 missions in Latin America. And the reason we have the word Latin American in the LULAC organization is because of Perales. because he lived in Nicaragua for 2 years. He was a pan-Latino person from the 1920s on. So he's one that I particularly like to talk about. I also like to talk about Alice Dickerson Montemayor, who really is the first feminist in the LULAC organization in the 1930s. I have written an extensive article about her, and she was challenging the machismo of the organization at the time. She wrote an editorial called Son muy hombres, but with a question mark, allowing for change and reform. But unfortunately, for personal reasons, and also because of a very sexist environment in Laredo. Sorry, Laredo, but I'm going to out you that only a few years ago, the Men's Council in Laredo finally permitted women. Okay, Laredo's been way behind. So Alice Dickerson Montemayor is a very important figure in the history of LULAC. I will say, let me say also that I have completed a book manuscript. It'll probably come out not this year, but next year, on the history of women in LULAC. And I'm now dedicating myself to the centennial.
Great. No, thank you so much. I think we have time for any other questions that folks have. I could hear you all. I could listen to the history all night. To be honest, I'm just fascinated by it. I think there's so much, this organization, it's incredible. The stories that make up this organization's history. I think it's so fascinating to see it. And also
Again, I want to suggest to folks to look at the timeline that is now on the LULAC website that I developed. Again, I did the first version for Texas in 1990. The last version, 2024, is very comprehensive, and it's a guide. And really, I am proud to say that my timelines are the basic foundation of any LULAC history videos that you see on the internet. It's my work that is the backbone of those videos.
one last question here. You mentioned our 100-year anniversary coming up soon. On the historical patterns, what you've seen in the past, like what lessons would guide the organization to make it past the 100-year threshold and beyond?
A serious look at the Constitution, serious attention to how to move into the future with younger people, because we do know that we have a large number of older folks, such as myself. So those are some things offhand that I can think of. Revision of the Constitution, new ways of inclusion, new ways of communication. And I think this is a good start.
Great. No, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to President Palomares to close it out.
Okay, I'll close it up. Thank you. So just finished an interview with some TV station in Corpus Christi. So they had, it was thought it would be a 15-minute thing, but it's about 30 minutes. They plan to have the next 2 or 3 days, they'll be putting parts of it on in Corpus. We talked a little bit about, LULAC, and I did talk about, in Corpus Christi, we have 3 past national presidents that still live there, the Bonillas.
Yes.
Ruben Bonilla and Margaret Moran are actually the co-chairs of our 100th anniversary committee. Nick Adame, who is the president of Council 1, is also part of that. Cynthia Orozco will be working with them. And we will have a short presentation at this meeting regarding our 3-year workup to the 100th anniversary. We want to make sure that we return to Corpus Christi in 2029. Let's see who the national president will be there. But I think that's one of the areas. And I did mention to the lady a while ago when I was interviewing that we're going to be working the next 3 years, doing events around the country to build up to the 100th anniversary. And we hope to be in Corpus Christi. So if everything works out, we'll be in Corpus Christi in 2029 to celebrate our 100th. But as we build up over the next 3 years, hopefully maybe every quarter or something, we'll do something, or maybe at some location. And as we get closer, like maybe on the 99th, we'll be doing something, in different places where we can build up. Like I said, we do have an outline of that. I've asked Margaret Moran to address that at our next national board meeting next week. She'll probably give you a handout or an outline. Any ideas you may have or whatever, that's the input that we need. So as we get ready to work up towards that, let's see what kind of ideas that, as we build up to that. And Cynthia Orozco, Dr. Cynthia Orozco will be working with us, making input and different things that we can do around the country. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Other than that, I want to thank Dr. Orozco. I'm curious to see some of the books at the LULAC convention. She was at the Texas State Convention last year. She had a booth there, had some of her books, and we're going to do that again. I've asked her to bring all her series of books for the Fort Worth convention, so we hope to see her there. I know she'll be there. But anyway, other than that, that's all we have. Thank you for the folks that attended tonight. Hopefully, I went through the PowerPoint slide today earlier, and it was impressive. And I know she's got a lot more work that she'll be sharing next month with women. We hope to join in on that. And she'll be working with Lupa Torres already. They've already, they've had their first meeting, and they're working to present. I forget what date that is, 17th of March or
the 10th. March
the 10th of March. Okay. So that'll be the next one. And she's working on that. So thank you for that. Other than that, I don't have anything else. I want to thank you, and we'll regroup. Looking forward to getting ready to finish up a little email here for the board. It'll have the final agenda for next week. And thank you for some of the board members that are on here. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.